This time it's going to be about the demon of speed. I even wanted to start this story by saying that when motorization appeared, humanity suddenly began to race fiercely. But of course that's not true. It seems like humanity has some kind of competition gene from, well, I don't know since when. Anyway, even in Rome, they raced chariots on some kind of oval tracks, you could say, which was probably a precursor to today's Formula One. Don't think that those first vehicles drove slowly, or that they were just, how should I put it, leisurely rides for elderly gentlemen somewhere in the woods, or just some kind of fun on the track. If we realize that these vehicles, let me remind you, the first speed record and breaking the 100 kilometers per hour mark happened back in the 19th century. Granted, it was by car, and in fact an electric one, but still people were already driving at 100 kilometers per hour in the 19th century, and shortly after that, sports vehicles powered by combustion engines were going almost as fast. By the way, that 100 kilometers per hour already at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, some scientists, journalists, maybe a bit of both, claimed that a speed of 100 kilometers per hour was the limit for humans, that it was the speed at which people would die. That is, you would die simply from reaching a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Well, reality has since disproved that. But you know what? That 100 kilometers per hour limit still lingers within us. And it's also true that the human body's reactions, like to braking, to certain maneuvers, overtaking, and so on around that 100 kilometer per hour mark are what they are. After all, it's not for nothing that there are road signs, speed limits like 100 on regular roads, 120 or 130 on highways, but ever since the beginning of motoring, that 100 has basically been considered some kind of barrier, I'd say, well, for the human. Back then, we thought it was the human body, and now it seems more like it's a barrier for the human psyche. So 100 kilometers per hour is fast enough to, well, get seriously injured. The very first vehicles were basically steam-powered locomobiles, which were a huge threat, so to speak, to the horse lobby, meaning for carriages, stagecoaches, basically everything that was used for transport, probably even river transport as well. Well, the steam engine, didn't require, so to speak, cleaning or washing. Well, it did need to be watered, actually, and fed with coal or wood. However, it was capable of working around the clock, 24 hours a day. What's more, it seemed that the potential of these machines was much greater than that of horse-drawn transport. And this anti-motorization lobby, so to speak, came up with the idea of fighting the competition for the first time back in 1865, if I recall correctly, when the so-called Red Flag Act was introduced in Great Britain. This act imposed speed limits. At that time, there were no cars yet. Instead, there were steam-powered vehicles, sort of like buses, running intercity routes and so on. And they were already capable of traveling fairly quickly and safely. Therefore, in 1865, out of concern for the health and safety of all road users, an act was introduced in Great Britain, the so-called Red Flag Act, which limited the speed of motor vehicles to, well, basically to how much? To 5 kilometers per hour. And this restriction, of course, there were neither radars nor police at that time, and that a pedestrian had to walk in front of every vehicle, waving a red flag and warning everyone along the sides of the road that this steam carriage was coming. Meanwhile, horse-drawn vehicles could travel on those roads as much as they wanted, so they were actually faster, and in reality the whole point was to stifle the competition. However, progress simply can't be stopped that easily. And interestingly enough, even earlier, a similar ban was introduced, I would say, but for locomotives running on tracks, that is, for trains. And in 1855, the speed of trains in Great Britain was limited to 16 kilometers per hour. 16, because that was the result of converting from miles. But that's beside the point. I mean, it was simply nonsensical. Trains at that time could probably go 50, 70, maybe even 100 kilometers per hour. But they didn't, because that was the law in Great Britain. That particular law, in effect, caused the significant development of widespread motorization to be effectively and completely halted in that specific country for a considerable period of time, even though, technologically speaking, they were truly world leaders and possessed the remarkable capability to design and build truly fantastic and innovative vehicles. Simply put, for legal reasons, they just couldn't take advantage of it, and since they couldn't take advantage of it, in reality they didn't build them. And so you could say that France actually became the cradle of motorization. Germany as well, to some extent, because they could do as they pleased there, but not in Great Britain. However, that law was repealed in 1896. Nevertheless, for those 40 or almost 50 years, it very effectively stifled the development of motorization, or really anything related to wheeled or even rail transport. As a result, the first competitions or races, whatever you want to call them, it's hard to say whether they were rallies or races. The point was to see who would reach the finish line first, although just making it to the finish was already a big achievement, because they often broke down and didn't really want to work properly. The very first official race ever, well, it was a car and motorcycle race, because I think about 40 vehicles started, of which 3 were motorcycles. Incidentally, none of them made it to the finish line. Out of those motorcycles, of course, I think over 100 designs were submitted, but in reality, only 21 were actually allowed to start. The first of these races took place in 1894 on the Paris-Rouen route. And that was quite a significant distance, because it was 126 kilometers. Electric vehicles also took part, but none of them actually made it to the finish. Steam-powered cars and combustion engine cars also competed. Victory went to, in fact, steam-powered vehicles dominated the top positions, as they simply ran without any issues, didn't break down, had tremendous torque, and only reached modest speeds. So these steam cars, let's call them something like locomobiles, outperformed the competition, but it was really the swan song for road-going steam vehicles. Incidentally, the average speed on this route over those 126 kilometers was 17 kilometers per hour, which was basically unattainable for a person on foot or even for horses. At that moment, it became clear that motorization simply had to happen, and so to speak, machines had to replace horses. I'll be talking about this in the next episodes as well, but as it turned out, many countries, including Poland, didn't fully believe in it. That was probably still the case even at the beginning of the 1930s. Nevertheless, that is precisely how it all happened. Those very early vehicles were typically equipped with engines possessing a modest power output of approximately 3 to 5 horsepower, but as you know, it's not the power, so to speak, that's the main factor affecting a vehicle's speed or its pulling power, it's the torque. Let me give you a very simple example. Imagine a Honda, let's say a Honda CBR with 120 horsepower, it doesn't matter which model. Do you think you could tow a camper trailer to Lake Balaton with that Honda? Of course not, but you could do it with a little Fiat with just 24 horsepower. And that's exactly because of different curves, different torque characteristics, a different clutch, and so on. So it's not the power, but rather the torque that matters here. Following the official repeal of the Restrictive Red Flag Act in Great Britain, there was, so to speak, a truly rapid and significant wave of automotive development and innovation that swept across the nation. People started racing, speeding around in their various strange vehicles. The number of fatal accidents on British roads skyrocketed. As a result, in 1904, the maximum speed of vehicles was limited to 20 miles per hour, which in practice is about 30 kilometers per hour. For, let's say, regular road traffic, You could say, let them have those 30 kilometers per hour. After all, it seems we are now returning to similar regulations. Nowadays, in some places you drive 30 through the city, in others 40, and 50 is already considered extravagant. Nevertheless, what about the development of motorsport? British sportsmen who wanted to drive much faster, to race, to have fun, and so on, simply took offense and moved their races out of Great Britain, but not entirely out of Great Britain. They moved to the Isle of Man, which, by the way, is part of, so to speak, the United Kingdom, but has its own parliament. There, a governor exercises power on behalf of the Queen, but the legislation is set by the parliament, and on the Isle of Man there were no speed limits. I think there still aren't any to this day. That is, of course, if there are road signs posted, then there are limits, but if there aren't any signs, it means you can drive as fast as you want, and basically the law relies, I would say, on common sense drive as fast as you are able to. As a result, all those racers, here I should point out that initially both car and motorcycle racers moved to the Isle of Man. And the first such trip, the first car and motorcycle race on the St. John's Douglas Castletown route took place in 1906. And there both cars and motorcycles raced. However, starting from 1907, the legendary tourist trophy began, which continues to this day, and now only motorcycles race there, with only a few interruptions, let's say, during World War II, and now the second such case was due to COVID. These races, regardless of everything, have always taken place, and God willing, may they continue to be held in the future. What's more, at one time, they also served as a round of the Motorcycle World Championship. Only the American drivers, probably with slightly less cojones than the locals, there simply protested the Isle of Man, saying it was too dangerous, that too many people were getting killed, that, well, you just shouldn't be allowed to race there. The international organization stripped the Isle of Man of its status as a world championship round, which only increased the popularity of these races. And the tourist trophy races simply became a kind of mecca for all sorts of daredevils and madmen who, well, probably don't really value their own lives all that much. Because in the history of these races, there has never been an edition without fatalities, both among the riders and the spectators. Quite simply, the speeds there are tremendous. Today, those motorcycles go over 300 kilometers per hour there, and everything takes place on local roads, in towns, villages, through mountain twists and turns and so on. It's not like on racetracks, where the barriers are improved and upgraded. There you just go for it raw and unfiltered. In 1908, the average speed during those races on the Isle of Man was 58.5 miles per hour. 58 per hour, as I said, riding through villages, towns and mountains. Miles per hour is a speed that nobody can reach on the Warsaw-Mrągowo route these days, no matter what they're driving, plain and simple. That's because of traffic jams, congestion, and so on and so forth. Of course, on the Isle of Man, those roads are closed off, so it's safer. But keep in mind that 58, which is almost 60 miles per hour, that's close to 100 kilometers per hour in vehicles that barely had brakes, barely had suspension, and you really had to have a lot of courage and some serious cojones to take part in races like that. Of course, people were racing in America as well. It seems that the Brooklands track was opened in the same year as the first races on the Isle of Man. But here's an interesting fact. In Poland, we actually had motorcycle races a bit earlier. Granted, Poland as a country didn't exist yet, but there was a track at Dynazy run by the Warsaw Cyclists Association. It was first dirt track, then wooden, and the first motorcycle competitions were held there, I believe, in 1904. But I'll talk about that in the next episode, which will focus on Polish automotive history, Polish races, and Polish motorcycles.